Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. This is episode 4 in our Marriage for Life series that we've done, one of the few kind of long series that we've done on Space for Life. And I think this is going to be a phenomenal episode. I have a good friend, Lisa Ould, joining us. And Lisa is going to wear about 4 or 5 hats, I think, in this particular episode. She's representing all these different groups. So we've had in the first 2 episodes, we had Tom Barilla, who came with, years of experience as a marriage coach. And we had David Dwight, who brought kind of the pastoral approach to everything, 2 males. And now we have Lisa, who does quite a bit of marriage counseling and counseling beyond that and teaching, and also is representing the female world of this. And, I asked David a little bit about that I guess it was the last episode, and he tried to represent the female, struggles and desires, but I think we're better off with you on this.
Well, I trust both those guys a lot, so hopefully we can complement each other well.
Yeah, well, this is going to be great. I think it's going to provide some great insights, some really necessary and important perspectives, both from the counseling perspective and then also from the female perspective. Mm-hmm. And not only the female perspective about how women see things, but what women see that men don't see about their side of things. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot to discuss, and I think there are also some unique angles that you have coming from the Barnabas Center as executive director that I think are also going to be critical elements of the marriage discussion. So welcome to Space for Life. I'm going to let you kind of describe not just what you do, but the Barnabas Center, just as context for this discussion.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Tommy. It's a privilege to be here. And the Barnabas Center is a center that's committed to counseling and training. And so we have really realized through the years as we look at what we do, it all circles around this phrase that we've begun to talk about more of redemptive conversations. That we long in the counseling room with people. We're counselors, that we learn a lot clinically, but at the heart, we're after what is God doing in someone's life, in their story, and that guides the kind of conversations we're having with them.
Right.
But we also see so much what people need is good friends outside the counseling room.
Wow.
And since we're a ministry that exists to support the local church, we've developed a training called Barnabas Training that we do in a variety of settings. We've done it in churches, with leaders, small groups. But under all of that is really trying to train people that their everyday conversations more and more get to a redemptive level. Because a lot of the struggle that we're experiencing in the world is connected to loneliness. That when we go through hard times, we go through marriage struggles, we don't, as friends, know how to talk to each other about that. So I'm excited about our conversation about marriage because it feels like it just dovetails with the Barnabas overall vision around growing people and how to talk, how to have conversations.
Well, that's so good. And it's ended up being a pretty constant theme in Space for Life this particular year. Earlier this year, we had Justin Early on, who wrote Made for People. And it was centered, amongst other things, about this epidemic of loneliness and the degree to which people no longer really knew how to develop friendships. And then even with this series, while this series is about marriage, which is, of course, you can't get any more relational, the whole angle for me about this is that it's first and foremost about learning how to love well.
Yeah, exactly.
And that goes beyond marriage. And it goes to, if we can't have conversations well with other people, we're not going to have them in our marriage.
Yes.
And if we can have them in our marriage, it's probably equipping us to have good conversations and relationships outside.
Yes.
So it's perfect.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. A core passage for me, really, in guiding of Barnabas is comforting others with the comfort we ourselves have first received from God. And so I thought of that at the core of it is love, and the core of our relationship with each other and how we offer comfort and encouragement all comes first from our relationship with Christ. So
Yeah,
it all flows together.
absolutely. Well, one of the things I love about that approach from Barnabas Center, that's not necessarily true with all counseling. So certain, I guess, fields of counseling are so, almost totally listening oriented. And yet I love that while that's such an important focus, there's also, we want to train people because very often people just don't know how to do
Yes.
this,
Yes. Yes.
which sounds crazy. How do
Yeah.
you not know how to do
Yeah.
this? And that's become, more epidemic in our culture, which I'm sure you'll get into. So I love that. So I would be curious from just a beginning, really big picture standpoint. You've been doing this for a while. What do you see as the state of marriage today? Just big picture, how marriage is going, how people are thinking about it. You know, President gives a State of the Union address. What would you say is the state of marriage today?
Big question. It's a
Yeah.
really big question, but it fits with what we're already talking about right now, that there's such loneliness in marriage. So there's loneliness in the world. So if there's loneliness in the world and there's breakdown relationally and how we talk to each other in the world, then that's true in the counseling room.
Wow.
So we're living with people that we don't really know, that we don't really understand, and we don't really know how to talk to. And then you add on that, we've got wounds that we've brought into our marriages, and we don't know how to talk about those things. Our own challenges that we've had with our own parents, the own way we were raised, sort of childhood wounds, you might say. We bring that into a marriage. And then not knowing how to relate to each other, we've begun to create some of our own wounds within the marriage. And so we're wounded people living day to day with each other without the skills and often the awareness, the heart awareness of who we are and what we're bringing, trying to connect.
Right. So there's a self-awareness piece to it. And one of the things I've seen just in coaching some people over the years is that there's a certain subset of single people who look at marriage as the ultimate answer, inherently for loneliness.
Yes.
Like all I have to do is to go from being single to being married,
Yes.
and the loneliness that I'm feeling now will be gone automatically. And what you're saying is that's not necessarily the case.
It's not. I'll tell you, Tommy, I married later, as you know. You've known Nelson, my husband, longer than I have.
You married well. And he married well,
yes.
but you married well.
It was worth the wait. It was worth the wait.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was said to me, as a woman that was waiting for marriage, is the best thing for the rest of your life is to be as healthy as you can now. That if you're lonely, you're not enjoying your life as a single person, you're not creating the soil for someone to enjoy with you. And so marriage is not going to solve your singleness, your loneliness problem.
Right.
You will have a companion, but there's a lot we have to do in ourselves that actually creates that soil for connection in a good marriage.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's like kind of fundamental advice for anybody, young, the 20s or 30s that is navigating that territory of either just singleness in general or a relationship that they are hoping to develop that, someone else is not going to fix your issues. That's
that
great.
could be a whole other conversation that we could have sometime. But honestly, I ended up in counseling and as a counselor because I was looking at my life at age 29 and thinking, what do I want to do for the rest of my life that I would enjoy doing? I'm single. I don't know how long I will be single.
Right.
So I ended up going back to grad school and pursuing a career that has given me a lot of meaningful years. But it started in that space of,
Yeah.
I want to create a meaningful life, whether married or single.
Gosh, that is so good. I mean, that is kind of fundamental, and I don't think we've said quite what you're saying here so far in the series. And I
Mhm.
think that's just so important that, you begin with yourself,
Mhm.
getting
Mhm.
to a healthy place
Mhm.
and a self-aware
Mhm.
place yourself.
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
you can bring a healthy self into a
Yeah.
marriage, the chances of that
Yes.
marriage doing
Yes.
well is so much
Yes.
better.
Yeah. A lot of times when a marriage comes into the counseling room in a really raw place, we actually pull the couple apart for a while and do some individual work. Because we want those sessions together to make progress and feel like a strengthening. And if we're in such a hard place that someone isn't able to really look at themselves, that they're so focused on what the pain their spouse is bringing them,
Right.
we feel like, let's have some conversations individually before we bring them back together.
That's so good. I would believe in just a little bit I know, I would believe and affirm that
Mhm.
as so good. So
Mhm.
thanks. That's great.
Mhm.
So you've already kind of touched on this, but in our first episode in this series with Tom, who's done so much marriage counseling, I
Mhm.
asked him and brought some thoughts of my own on what are some of the minefields in marriage. And by
Mhm.
minefields, I was thinking about not just the normal everyday issues, but the things that can occur in a marriage that have that potential to blow up
Mhm.
on us
Mhm.
and to create such debris
Mhm.
that we have a hard time recovering
Mhm.
from it.
Mhm.
So I'd be curious from your angle, are there, any particular things that jump out that you go, boy, when we run into this, we know we've got some work to do.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
sure there are probably a
Mhm.
bunch of them.
Yeah. Well, and I've listened to some of your other episodes because it's going to sound a bit like I'm just jumping on your message, but it's actually would be the message I would preach as well. That a starting place is the stress of not having space.
Mhm.
That when couples come in and they sit down and I have a sense of their schedule, that even sometimes, my earliest clients in the day, when I hear all that has happened before they got to my office, I just wonder how in the world they're managing all the plates that are spinning. And we just live really, really busy lives. And so to have meaningful conversations, if we were to dovetail probably your core message of space
Right.
and my core message of conversation, and having conversations with each other, that if you don't have those two together, that would be a minefield, I would say. That it's hard to
Yeah.
cultivate meaningful relationship with someone if you don't have the space to have connecting conversations.
Sure. There are two angles to that. Number one, you have the angle of just the practicality of if you're so busy that you can't get around to having
Mhm.
conversation.
Mhm.
And that's just a core problem
Right.
that a lot of people
Yeah.
have to begin with. But I also think about it and I reflect back on earlier years in my marriage, Weezy and I's marriage, and it's an anecdote that I think about. I don't even know if it's true, but apparently when the painting of the Last Supper was
Hmm.
being painted, they cast all of the Jesus and the 12
Mhm.
disciples, and most of the disciples were not difficult to cast, but then they needed to cast Jesus and they needed to cast Judas. And according to the legend, again, I don't know whether it's true or not, they had an easier time casting Jesus. And then they had a bear of a time finding the Judas. And when they finally found the Judas character,
Mhm.
it was the same person that was the Jesus, that person had
Huh.
gone through such a transformation to the negative of what had
Wow.
happened in their life. the point of that
Right.
being that when I was so busy and stressed out and overwhelmed 30 years ago, when we began this journey of finding space, I would go out during the day and I would be all smiles and all
Mm,
strong and everything. And I would come in and the door would close and I
mhm,
was a different person.
mhm, mhm.
I was not a
Mm.
bad person,
Right.
but I had nothing
Right.
left in the tank.
Yeah.
And it was virtually impossible for me to be a good husband
Mhm,
or a good father
mhm.
or even a good person
Yeah. Right.
because of what
Yeah.
busyness and stress and overload had
Yeah.
done. So
Yeah.
that goes
Yeah.
right to your
Yeah.
point.
So, I mean, with that, what I have seen this in the counseling room. I also see it in my own marriage, both time and a setting in order to connect.
Mm,
So that for us, we're both in ministries. My husband Nelson's a pastor, so we have found that Friday is the best day that we both try to take off, and at least in the morning is sort of space for us to connect. Because we have found,
mhm.
even when you have a day off like Friday, you end up with a repairman and doctor's appointments, and before you know it, you're
Right.
not busy with your job, but you're busy with all that other life maintenance. And so trying to create that Friday is our time, but also a context that works for us. Like somehow this spring we rediscovered Tuckahoe Plantation. So this beautiful property not far from where we are right now,
Right.
where we have just started taking a cup of coffee and an hour and just wandering around, seeing spring wake up, look at the animals. And it's not hard for us to get to, but it's out of the home.
Right.
So we're not distracted by anything else.
Right.
And so I enjoy getting creative, especially with couples with young kids, about what that kind of space can look like. It's always a little easier this time of year. In Richmond, it's starting to get warmer.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'll talk to couples about, can you get an hour on the front porch after you put the kids in bed? Bring a monitor outside, or that you're even in your own space. You don't, because a date night just feels so luxurious of how do we get the sitter and spend the money, and all of those things can
Sure.
be inhibited. And so how do you create time and space in your own home that works for both of you? One of the things that I had to learn is that Nelson is chattier at night, and we both have had to learn this. He's chatty at night, and I'm chatty in the morning.
Oh.
And
Huh.
so, but early in the marriage, because he was chatty at night, I would sometimes ask about a work thing. And I had learned quickly, shocker, that he didn't want to talk about the most stressful thing in his day as we were ending the day,
Even though it's chatty.
even though he's chatty.
Right.
I'm like, well, you like to talk. And so I want to ask about it. But so we had to learn when is the best time that we want to talk, and what are the things we want to talk about at different times. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
So he
Yeah.
likes to talk about something fun or something spiritual, or at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I'm the more serious one. So I want to oh, you had that meeting today. I want to ask about that. So I think time and setting and what your spouse finds meaningful and when.
Yeah. Several things I heard in that. I mean, one is you said you had to learn this. So, what you worked on is something creative,
Mhm.
something that's practical.
Mhm.
As much as you'd love to think that conversation should just come naturally and
Right.
something's wrong if we're just
Right.
not doing this. In our world, you have to be practical, you have to be
Yes.
creative,
Yes.
you have to be intentional.
Yes.
And then you had to be observant
Yes.
enough, aware enough to go,
Yes.
okay, this is the nuance of
Yes.
how we need to do this.
Yes.
And then you're learning that, which is the very thing that you're teaching
Yes.
in the counseling. And
Yes.
it's like, you mean you have to work at this stuff this hard?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
That's
it does.
great. Yeah.
It does. And as I was thinking about our conversation, it's such the mixture of heart and skills. So some of
Yes.
these things that we're talking about are like skills of what's the context for a conversation, or we could talk about what are some of the ways to have that conversation. But then there's also the heart involved of I want what I want. Well, I want to talk in the morning. I like to have a cup of coffee and sit outside. And so, what is the time of the morning that we could do that on the Friday? That Nelson is up and going and ready for that.
Right.
Or if he wants to do it at night, what does that mean? That our selfishness, honestly, or it can be our own desires, but also can be we
Yeah.
want it our way. And so
Well,
working at that part too.
exactly, which is it dovetails with what we talked about in I guess it was the second episode of the love languages, that one of the real challenges is that we speak different love languages.
Yeah.
And so the greatest act of love is to love someone in a language different
Yes.
than
Yes.
what is meaningful for
you. Yes.
you. And that's exactly what you're saying with
Yeah.
this, which is great. And again, it's kind of counterintuitive, and somehow I think we got really the wrong message that the marriage stuff would be easy and should come naturally. I mean, if we love the person, it should come naturally, and we shouldn't have to work at this, but we do.
We do. We do.
Yeah.
There's a phrase, I don't know who started using it, I think in the last year or so, is facing the fact that we're human, and kind of hearing that a little bit more, that, yeah, part of being human is that we're broken people. We're not always able to see someone else, and we have to face our humanity, face the humanity of our spouse,
Right.
and be curious about that in one another.
Yeah. And it's a whole nother, probably won't be able to get into all of this, but the aspect of marriage that even in the best of situations, you have two wounded people coming into it.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
And often in the dating part of things, we don't really get to those
right.
wounds at that part.
Right.
So we're hoping the other person is going to
Yes.
fix and heal our wounds, but we're not aware that they have wounds in the dating part. Maybe sometimes not.
Right. Right. Yeah. If I can think about it, I had a supervisor that had an analogy that was, when we're dating, we bring the breast that we want to bring of ourselves to the other person, but we're hiding something else. Then as we get to know each other, we allow them to see that part of ourselves. But then the longer we're married, there's actually this part of ourselves that we didn't even know either. And so we're seeing it for the first time, and our spouse is getting to know. That's just part of self-awareness. We're growing. And so all of a sudden you have two people that are married, and it's like, I'm seeing something of myself I didn't know. And I'm seeing something of you that I didn't know.
Well, and one of the minefields I think that I mentioned in that first one is when one or both of the people in a marriage stop growing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Personally, spiritually, vocationally, when that growth stops, you've got some really dangerous territory.
Right. And I think that that's true in marriage. It's a reality that I think it's often a gift to help people see, in counseling and in Christian counseling, is that we're all people that are struggling with pain and sin. That there's legitimate pain in the world of how life has come our way. It's not something we caused, but we're dealing with it. And we also have our sin. We have our parts of life that we've chosen that get in the way. And that's part of being human. That until Jesus comes back, we're going to be working. We're not going to work our way out of that type of growth. Hopefully we are growing in it.
Right. I'm sure one of the rewarding pieces of what you do, because what you're talking about is some really hard, painful stuff. But I would imagine there's just such tremendous joy in seeing a relationships that were really suffering, see them coming into what marriage can be, the intimacy, the refound love of a relationship, the sense of having a friend when maybe that disconnection, that when you see that, it's like all of this hard stuff you deal with becomes worth it.
Yes. You see and oftentimes the love that is more than they ever had to begin with.
Yeah.
That there's something that it's not just restoring some of the pain, but we're finding something that was never there before.
Well, and that's a real message of hope
Yep.
to people who are listening because,
Yes.
sometimes, I mean, it would be very easy to think that the best I could hope for would be to recover
Yeah.
some of those feelings that
Yes.
I had a while back. What you're saying is, no, there's actually a much deeper, richer
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
that's even beyond what
Yeah.
you had a while
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. And I think part of that is as we grow and having these redemptive conversations, which means I'm able to pursue someone and know them on a deeper level. My hope is that we're growing to be the greatest advocates for our spouses. So I know your wounds, I know your pain, and I'm actually part of the covering. I'm part of pursuing that and caring for that. And that all comes from knowing you in a deeper way.
Mm.
And so the wounds don't be the place that we wound each other more. But as I know them and I understand maybe even more why you hurt me at times, I understand what's behind that. So now I can move towards you in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's pretty amazing to have someone know you and still love you. That's
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
we don't necessarily speak
Yeah.
about. It's not like we think that's not
Yeah.
possible, but deep down we think that's not
Yeah.
really possible.
Yes. Yes.
And, to
Yes.
be able to
Yeah.
have that
Yes.
kind of
Yes. Yes.
exposure and
Yes.
have the person still say,
Yeah.
I
I mean,
still love
that's
you.
our greatest longing, I believe, is to be seen and that someone stays in the room, that we
Mm,
fear that if you really see me. I think I heard Kurt Thompson say that for the first time of just, I believe that if you see me, you're going to run out of the room.
right.
And we long for people that will see us and know us and stay in the room.
Well, that is an incredible vision. As much as, we want to talk about the hard things, I also hope that this series will give people
Yeah.
a vision of the beauty of what's possible on the other side
Mm-hmm.
of some of the
Mm-hmm.
work that we
Mm-hmm.
do. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's an incredible,
Yeah.
incredible
Yeah.
vision.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to switch hats
Sure.
now. We've had a couple of men talking about what needs to be happening in marriages. I'd love for you to just share whatever kind of you want to about
Mm-hmm.
what do you see in people that you counsel, in yourself? What do you think is a female perspective about marriage and about relationships that's worth putting words to for other females, but
Mm-hmm.
also for males to hear that may not be so obvious?
Mm-hmm. I always enter this kind of conversation with a little bit of pause because I often hear in the room some of the stereotypes. You say, well, women this, and actually in this couple, it's a role reversal. It's something that a man longs for in that way, in a different way than a woman. So just as
Yes,
a
I love that.
whatever that
Yes.
is, a caveat, or I don't know, whatever, that's to say these are dynamics that show up in the marriage. Sometimes it's a man-woman dynamic, but it is a dynamic where people can feel not seen or connected in the way that they would long to.
Okay.
So at the core of that women want to be heard. And so there's, it's probably not a new concept, and that often men can lean towards a fixing orientation where a woman wants just connection. And so to speak a little bit more to that, I think all of that comes from our image bearing of God, that as humans, we are people that long for intimacy and impact. So that's how we reflect God. God is an intimate Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They're intimately connected.
Mm-hmm.
God created man to make a difference and go out into the world.
Right.
So typically, women have a little more of the intimacy side, and men have a little more of the impact side. That
Sure.
can go either way.
Right.
But I see often that what a woman is wanting to do is to share about, particularly in the area of something difficult. And what she wants is really to be seen and connected to in that struggle.
Yeah.
And a man so longs to be helpful. So if he has listened well to his wife, he often wants to fix that thing for her where she wants to be known.
Yeah, I have to admit, I think I really struggle with that. I even struggle with it intellectually. And I don't think my problem to speak of is so much that I don't listen, because I do think I will, in my better moments, that I'm listening
Mhm,
fairly carefully,
mhm.
but it's so hard for me to turn off that, well, I have a suggestion. I've
Yes,
listened to you so much, and
yes,
it seems so obvious that this
yes.
could help the situation. And so I can't almost turn off
Mhm,
intellectually that,
mhm,
why would it make sense for me to not try to fix it
mhm,
if I feel like
mhm,
I can?
mhm,
And so I think I
mhm.
fit, whether it's a stereotype or a generalization or
Right,
whatever, I think
right. Yeah,
I fit that, hopefully not in a tremendously obnoxious way,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I think I fit that myself, and it's a hard thing to
Yes,
turn off.
yes, yes. Nelson and I have, we talk about this because when you were asking sort of what does men want, because what I hear from him is he often wants my input. If he's bringing something, I'm actually wanting encouragement that I can do the thing.
Yeah,
So that's the respect side that we often hear from men is I want a sense that you believe in me,
right.
you respect me, the struggle that I'm up against, I can handle. So he's wanting that type of affirmation and then some help with a solution. And
Mhm.
men often they want that. Whereas women want the connection, maybe the solution later, but sometimes actually the connection helps bring about the solution. I recently had a conversation with a woman that it resonated with me where she was saying, I think once she was upset about a relationship situation, she was bringing it, and she said, I needed him to be attuned to me. And
Right.
attuned means I'm like we're trying to be attuned to each other here, Tommy. We're
Yeah.
trying to listen to what each other is
Yep.
saying, follow the thought, pick up and that's what I needed. And by the time when he did that, by the time I finished talking, I'd actually come to my own solution. And I have a friend that's a coach, and she said it's actually true in coaching that people are best when they find their own solution. So even your really good input, often for a woman, if I felt cared for and I've quieted down the emotion, I now can actually get to my own solution
Yes.
that I might actually believe in even more because you've helped me come to my own solution. Does that
Yeah. I it makes a lot of sense, because I think that it it's not so much that you offer something to help or to fix the situation. It's, if you jump the gun on that
yes.
before the
Yes.
person feels like you have connected,
Yes.
David talks about that oneness.
Yes.
Before that
Yeah.
oneness is there,
Yeah.
that I understand what you're saying, I understand what you're feeling,
Yeah.
we're there, then I guess if you feel that, now you can be receptive if I have
Yes.
something to offer. But if I
Yes.
jump the gun, it's like
Yes.
you're way ahead of things.
Yes. Yeah, you've named some good things, Tommy.
Yeah.
Often in general in relationships and certainly in marriage, when we give that advice too quickly, we didn't really understand the situation. And sometimes it can be my sense of impact. I want to be helpful. So my desire to be helpful is actually more important than the person's being known.
Yeah.
So staying with their need that they really want to be known. And often, I have heard men say, it's hard. Like, you want me to get in the hole with them. And I might, to some degree, lose my perspective to be helpful. I'm afraid of what will happen to me in the mess.
Right.
And so, aren't I more helpful if I'm outside the hole trying to pull them out? And that's understandable that there's a fear. And the closer I get to the overwhelm, how is that going to
Would
impact me?
would you say, I'm supposing on this, that a piece of the problem sometimes for men is that they are both less in tune with their feelings and less desirous to be in tune with their feelings. So therefore,
Yeah.
to enter in, as you
Yeah.
say, is not something that's pleasant for a lot of men.
Yes.
Not something even that they see a lot of
Value in.
value
Right.
in.
Right.
And so if I can give you the value just by telling you what you need to know,
Right.
and I can protect myself from stuff I
Yes.
don't really enjoy.
Right.
And that's tough
Yeah.
to say, okay, this may not be pleasant to jump in the
Right.
hole, so to
Right.
speak,
Right.
but
Right.
do it
Right.
anyway.
Right. But if you'll care about me, you'll join me in that space.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's a big message. Yeah, that's a big
I
message.
think it is a core one. Mhm.
But it gets back to what you talked about that can be a little bit conceptual of this redemptive conversations.
Mhm. Mhm.
That sounds, you know,
Mhm.
kind of nice and comfortable,
Yeah.
but this is what
Yes.
you're talking about,
Yes.
that this is the price,
Yeah.
this is the
Yeah.
ingredients
Yes.
of
Yes.
redemptive
Yes.
conversation.
Yes. Yes. And a piece of a redemptive conversation for the caregiver or the listener or the spouse that's, on that side is holding the belief that God is doing something here. So you can actually get closer to the mess because you
Yeah.
don't have to be the solution. It's holding on to. I mean, that's how I sit with people. Ask sometimes, how do you do what you do every day? And it's a privilege to sit with people. And the times that it is harder is when I forget and I think, wow, this is a really hard situation and it's all up to me to fix it.
Right.
But when I'm holding to, yeah, we're in a hard place, but I believe God is with us and He's loving this couple, this individual, my spouse right now. So I can get closer because I'm getting
Yeah.
closer to the holiness and the work of God.
Well, and I think in line with your beginning caveat, that what I would want to add is that men may not be as attuned to it, but men have this exact same need too. And women can be as guilty of jumping the gun in a conversation.
Mhm.
And maybe sometimes it's fixing it, but sometimes it's also criticizing,
Yes.
what
Yes.
what a man doesn't really want to be
Yes.
criticized for.
Yes.
So this skill that you're
Mhm.
talking about
Mhm.
building, it it does go both
Mhm. Definitely.
directions.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's why I have a little trouble with the gender piece because I think there are ways that we lean, but again, there's ways that are just human. And I love what you're highlighting because, one of the things that I do work on sometimes with couples is the woman is wanting more emotional connection or more words from the man,
Right.
and he needs space to access those.
Right.
And so in a desire and an impatience, we as women can talk too much, can over
Right.
rather than giving our spouse the space to grow.
Right.
So that brings us back again to having eyes to see what is the need and the growth, not just for ourselves, but for our spouse, that really being
Yeah.
students of our spouse, students of ourselves, but students of our spouses. And so
Yeah.
as I see this is an area that my spouse is struggling or growing in, and then asking, what's the way for me to respond that may mean me doing something different?
Yeah. I think with this gender conversation, to me, if we can hear some of these thoughts, these generalizations, but not go to the direction of putting people in a box
Mhm,
and saying, well,
mhm.
I get you because I
Yeah.
know you're a woman,
Yes.
or you're a
Yes.
man,
Yes.
or you're an introvert,
Yeah.
all of these things. If we can
Yeah.
say there's some understanding,
Yes.
that can be helpful, but I'm not going to box you in with
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yes. We are all individuals with individual stories. And a word that we use a lot at Barnabas is being curious. And even
Mm.
I love that God asked, there's so many questions that were asked in the Bible. God of Adam and Eve in the garden? And, Jesus, there's a lot like, do you want to get well? A lot of these questions, they weren't because Jesus didn't know the answer. Like the conversation was good for the person. And so to be curious with our spouses, even if you've known them a long time and you think you might know what they're going to say to something, that continuing to ask questions to allow one another to articulate where we are, what we need.
Yeah. And often the questions in the Bible by God and by Jesus were what would be considered fairly obvious questions. What do you want?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm blind.
Blind.
What do you think I
I
want?
want. Exactly.
Type
Exactly.
of thing. So
Yeah.
there's a lesson to be learned
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
So that's great. So even though we're kind of saying we can't go but so far with the gender stuff, is there something from your perspective, the female perspective, that you see that'd be helpful for men to hear about, helpful for other women to hear about men, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I think just to follow up maybe of what we've already said, some of being aware of your words matter and the words to affirm and build up your husband. You have no idea what the value of that. That's what I hear, is looking for the spaces that you can. And sometimes a marriage is in a really hard place that someone's like, I don't know that I respect something about my husband. And so you want me to articulate something that I don't. And that's a great thing to pray for. If you're
Right.
struggling, if your marriage is in a place that you're struggling, that you're not sure what the space is to affirm or to build up, to pray that God would show you that, even in a small place that you're grateful, a small place of something that you're able to affirm, that the criticism is not what's going to help the marriage thrive. But
Yeah.
Again, we all need that. A wife needs words of encouragement, but I think there is a place where women really long to be heard and listened to, and men really long for the affirmation and the encouragement of their wife.
I would just personally very much second that. I think that really, even as a culture, we've lost the art and the skill of encouragement and building up one another. And from my perspective, even in those really, really difficult situations, there's still place and room for encouragement. And I think part of it is we just lost the muscles
I think
of
you're right.
encouragement.
I think you're right.
And if we could learn and see that we need to grow inside of ourselves to just be encouraging people, that if we're that way, then we can begin to do that. And I do think that is transformational for both husbands and wives. Almost turn a marriage around just by itself.
Yes. Yeah. It's not as the love language. It's not just the person that words of affirmation mean something to them.
Yes.
This is the core of mankind. I agree. And I think part of it is our worlds have become small. I mean, we just focus a lot on the individual and what we want and what we need out of life, and opening our eyes again to the world around us and the impact that we can have on one another.
Yeah. And I would almost verbalize about how worlds have become so distracted, that it's very hard to give the intentionality and the focus to become these kinds of people that you're talking about. So this is so great. And what I love about it, particularly having done this as, decided to do this as a series, is that I think we're hitting on some things that we haven't really hit on in some of the other conversations that is so critical. So this has been fantastic. I'd love it if you would maybe almost sum up some of the things that we've talked about, in the form of a takeaway for those who are listening, male and female, about, if we could think about one takeaway that if we practice this, if we just did the work of this one takeaway, we would inevitably be moving our marriages or our friendships, in that case, into a place of wellness.
Yeah.
Is there one suggestion that
It's
that's pretty
gonna
tough?
Yeah, and so I'll just go simple. Be intentional about asking the question, "How was your day?" And when you ask it, be prepared to listen to someone's answer and be ready with a few follow-up questions. And some questions we teach, in Barnabas training are, tell me more about that. So when someone's given you something, you're saying, I actually want more. I wasn't looking for good, bad, simple. I actually want to hear about your day. So you need to ask it when you're ready. So we talked at the beginning about like time and place. So not as a throwaway, question on your way out the door or through the kitchen, but take a deep breath, be aware that you have a 5 minutes and look your spouse or your friend in the eye and say, how was your day? And when they answer, listen and ask a follow-up, tell me more. If there was something disappointing in the day, what were you hoping for? How did you hope that was going to go differently? What were you expecting? Those are often our days are hard. So often we get a job, a relationship, something didn't go our way. And ask 3 follow-up questions when someone talks to you about their day.
Wow. It's so simple and just so good. So I love that. So that's real simple. I'm going to put that at the end of the show notes for people who are podcast geeks and go to show notes and stuff. I'm going to put that at the end as well as kind of connection to the Barnabas Center, because it's just so simple and practical.
It really
and
is.
Even though it might feel a little artificial, like I'm going to have a question, I'm going to have the same question, and then I'm going to have prepared. It's building the skills and the muscles that are undeveloped potentially of having good conversations. So that's great. Well, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation.
Well, yeah, I've enjoyed just getting to talk to you and hear your heart.
Yeah.
But thanks for having me.
This has been great. So got a good practical takeaway, everybody. And next week will be the last in the marriage series. I think it'll be a great conversation. Tom Barilla is going to come back to join me for that conversation. And then while we've been doing this, I've been having some phenomenal conversations with some other people that will follow up the marriage series. So a lot to look forward to, a lot to work on, a lot of place to grow. So thanks so much for listening. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
It's been incredible.
I have to go home and apply all these things I just said to you today. So
that's
it's
right.
always a good reminder.
That's right. Great. Thanks so much, everybody.